Good evening, everybody. Uh, I am going to talk today on the developing self-awareness domain of emotional intelligence and the role of self-effectiveness, self-awareness, effectiveness, and or personal effectiveness. This is a session which is based on the last four videos. First one, I've talked of the emotion in the first place, different kinds of emotions, and then I have talked about the self-awareness and development, then the four pathways, and finally in the last video, fourth one, I've talked about the emotional maturity model for developing emotional intelligence. So in this one, the things that I want to talk about is that self-awareness in the context of the emotional intelligence and self-awareness effectiveness in the context of personal effectiveness. So the two things, actually, if you look at these things, one is feelings, thinking, and action. First we feel, then we think, and then we act. The feeling thinking part is related to emotional intelligence, and the action part, self awareness effectiveness. In the emotional maturity model, in the last video, I have talked about the 9 boxes based on the combination of the components of the emotional intelligence and based on the components of self-awareness components. So in the self-awareness components, we have taken disclosure, feedback, and perceptiveness. So it is this part. So the context here is action and behavioral, and here feeling and thinking, cognitive thinking. Now emotional intelligence is understanding own feelings and its effects on one's own self and the response feelings generated, giving rise to diverse emotions. They could be positive, they could be negative, whatever. So this is what is important to manage, because they are getting generated based on, and how are these feelings coming out? These are coming out based on certain kinds of actions or events, some incidents, some happenings, something going on. Now to explain this little more elaborately, I would like to talk of some basic things which play and which needs to be given importance to understand this whole concept and the basic processes that go around the challenges to manage the emotional intelligence. One or the other, everyone is taking some or the other action on one or the other. Now when somebody is taking an action, then there is a response. The second process is that the person is responding. Now the response is given to make oneself comfortable, to make oneself comfortable, not uncomfortable. Now, the response may or may not make a person comfortable. If it doesn't make a person comfortable, then the third process operates, and that is known as adjustment. That is known as adjustment. And when one is making an adjustment, then that point of time, what is happening? Self hurt is happening. That is, self is getting hurt. And when the self is getting hurt, then there is a probability of creation or formation or generation of what we call as negative emotions, because the self is got hurt. Now, these negative emotions which has got generated, these needs to be managed. If it goes unmanaged, then the degree of self hurt will go on increasing. Once the degree of self hurt has gone on increasing, then the fourth process will come into operation, and that is known as reaction. So therefore, to put it now more clearly, action, response, adjustment, there is a third process, and reaction cycle. So there is a cycle which goes on, that is known as action, response, adjustment, reaction cycle. This goes on in all individuals. This goes on in all individuals. The degree of response could be higher, the degree of reactions could be higher or low, adjustments could be managed in different ways, but this action, response, adjustment, reaction cycle goes on. Now, what happens when this cycle is in process? That is important to understand. This cycle can be broken down into four distinct parts. The first one is what we call is action response process. That is, I am taking some action and the other one is responding. Second process is, along with the action response, the third process is also there, and that is action response adjustment process. Third one, action response adjustment and reaction process. Fourth one, action reaction. All of us are taking some or the other action to get certain count of outputs of the results. As long as the action response process is going on, the output or the result could be close to something 80%, 90%, whatever, high, very high. The moment there is some kind of an adjustment, the moment there is some kind of an adjustment, and there is a slight degree of hurt, then this will draw down, just broadly, will draw down to 60%. Along with the adjustment and reactions, along with this action response adjustment, some reactions have started occurring. It will further drop down to roughly 40%. And once the adjustment is no longer being made possible and shifted just to action response, the output result declines by 20%. Now, for achieving these outputs and results, there is certain degree of efforts needed, efforts required. When the action response process is 80%, definitely the effort required is very less, and that is 20. Similarly, action response adjustment process when it is 60, 40%. 80% of the time here is spent managing the reactions. 80% of the time spent here is managing the reactions. Once this action reaction process has set in, then the negative emotional charges escalate to a very high degree, and the individual finds very difficult to manage the negative emotions and remains in problem. Now, with this, two things are happening. One is acceptance, other is rejections. When the action response process is going on, then acceptance is close to, maybe let's say 80%, and rejection is close to 20%. Similarly here, acceptance is only 20% roughly, and rejection is 80%. What we accept, it develops the positive mindsets, and what we reject develops the negative mindset. So what is happening? In case when the action response process is going on, 80% positive mindset, and here 20% negative mindset, because what is being rejected is leading to the development of negative mindset. So one combination is this. At the other extreme, 20% positive and 80% negative mindset. Now, between these two extremes, all of us are. So we can see that how the emotions are managed in different ways by different individuals. So, posing management of emotions a big challenge, and that's where the role of EI comes into existence. The role of EI to shift these people, use AI to this, so that there is a continuously they are into the action response, that getting the response, because the problem comes only when I am taking some action, I am doing something, I am wanting something, expecting something, but it is not happening. And because it is not happening, so the reactions are there, adjustments are to be made, and little bit of negative emotions here also, little bit of negative emotions here also, very high degree of negative emotions here also. Now, how to understand that what is happening? Definitely through a process of some kind of an introspection. What is that introspection? I have taken some action, and because of some of my actions, the other person has is seen to be adjusting. The other person is seen to be adjusting. The moment the other person has started adjusting, maybe there is an elderly person, and elderly person has made some demand of the younger one, and younger one has felt bad about it, and he has not been comfortable, and he has adjusted because he was elder. Now this elderly person, he must be able to know that thus the other person has made some kind of an adjustment. The moment he has noted through the process of observing, through the process of introspection, whatever, that yes, the other one has made some adjustment, he must know that he has also got hurt. And once he has understood that yes, he has got hurt, then he has to remove the hurt of the other person. When he has removed the hurt of the other person, then you will move from here to here. That means from action response adjustment process to the action response process, and there where use of the emotional intelligence skills, may be needed to come to this. Now, if the adjustment is also not observed, along with the adjustment, the reactions have, then it makes things difficult. And once the complete action response process is going on, action response process is going on continuously, then it is still more difficult, and a very, very high degree of emotional intelligence is needed to shift to these situations to get a response. An individual, whoever it is, an individual in the family, an individual in the workplace, in the organization, in the society, if the response is not coming through, definitely it is the individual's failure. And that is, it is there where that the linkage of the emotional intelligence, particularly the linkage of the self-awareness domain of the emotional intelligence, needs to be linked up with the self-awareness effectiveness or personal effectiveness. Because effectiveness is important. My effectiveness, an individual's effectiveness, every individual's effectiveness is important, because if he's not effective, then he is not successful and he cannot excel in whatever field, in whatever place he is. So, this is a role of the emotional intelligence in managing the emotions, and then how the emotions come, how the emotions evolve, erupt, generate, can also be understood from this kind of a framework. And if we have got people, if we are working with a group of people where large majority of the people are here, or the large majority of the people could be here, whatever place, then they have to be understood. And it is again there also the role of the emotional intelligence comes in understanding the different kinds of people, and then taking appropriate steps to raise people from these different second, third, fourth category to the first category. What will happen? What will happen is that through a process of exercising different kinds of actions, steps to raise people by understanding the emotions of the other person and regulating one's own emotions, the person's emotional intelligence is bound to go up. So, the raising the emotional intelligence, this is about raising the emotional intelligence through the self-awareness domain. In the now coming to the other one, the self-awareness as a part of the effectiveness model that has been very, very elaborately talked about in the fourth model, uh, about the emotional maturity development, that how with the combination of emotional intelligence components, self-awareness, I would call it effectiveness components. In the fourth uh, video, I have called it self-awareness components, but instead of self-awareness components, we are calling it self-awareness effectiveness components, which is disclosure, feedback, and perceptiveness. In this one, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management. We are talking of, in this particular video, only the self-awareness. And the self-awareness, the most important thing is understanding one's own emotions. Just as in the previous explanation of the action response adjustment reaction cycle, we have seen that the emotions are getting generated by my own actions. Emotions are getting generated by my own inappropriate action, negative emotions particularly. So when the negative, I am the cause of the negative emotions, then I must be able to manage my own actions in a better way, so that the generation of the negative emotions are minimized, and a way is given out for generation of more positive emotions. So understanding your own emotions, managing negative emotions, and I would say before that, preventing generations of negative emotions, then managing negative emotions by understanding emotions, as said earlier. So this is about the emotional intelligence component, self-awareness as the domain of this. Now, once this is going on, then at this point of time, what is the degree of my self-awareness effectiveness? What is the degree of my self-awareness effectiveness? How effective I am, and which is indicated by the 4 windows which I elaborately explained in the second video, and in the third video, how to move the 4 pathways for moving to higher self-awareness effectiveness. The first window had given a large open area. There was a large hidden area, a large dark area, a large unknown area. Very elaborately, I mentioned that if just one process, and that is receiving feedback, is stopped, one process receiving feedback is stopped, one is bound to move from here to here. Second, if one has moved from here to here, then once through a process, as mentioned in the while explaining the action response adjustment reaction cycle, that there is the way that negative and positive emotions can get generated. So preventing generation of negative emotions, we will not be able to take note of, because this feedback process requires, as that was also mentioned in the second video, and that is that receive feedback and work on it. If one is not giving the feedback, then decode feedback, and this decoding of the feedback is what is explained out in the action response adjustment reaction cycle. That is, somebody is adjusting, then think that that person is getting hurt, and when that person is getting hurt, please remember he is getting hurt by your own actions, because your actions have made him like that. So we have to take care of my own actions, and that is what is decoding the feedback of one's own actions. Having said this, without, as mentioned very clearly in the emotional maturity model in the fourth video, that both emotional intelligence components and self-awareness effectiveness components have to go hand in hand. That is a combination of high emotional intelligence component and high self-awareness effectiveness components. With these two together, once they have gone together, then only good emotional intelligence will get developed. And I would like to mention that self-awareness as an important is a very important and a foundational domain of emotional intelligence. All the other 3 emotional intelligence domains, that is self-management, social awareness, and relationship management, are dependent on it. If this is become strong, this will all become strong. And I will be talking about the strengthening, identifying that how to identify the gaps in the self-management, challenges of the self-management, the social awareness and relationship management in my next video, to bring a complete holistic picture and integrated perspective of how to manage the emotional intelligence challenges and raise the emotional intelligence challenges from low emotional intelligence level to the higher emotional intelligence, and manage different kinds of the problems of the life and the organization. Thank you.